嗰個 Vincent，嗰個係名額，嗰個係一揾啊。
哦，你幾多歲啊？
嚇？佢8歲，佢8歲。
你咧
？8歲。
你係8歲啊？你幾多歲啊？
佢5歲嚇，你
5歲係嘛？5歲啊？你哪屆啊？哦。
同個邊袋啦，個邊袋開條先啲仔講就先啦。哎，啲仔嗰時喺係啊，喺兩邊啦咯，係咯。哎，幾好條個兩邊啦。誒，個好要可停住，可停。係兩個見都玩，換得兩件咯，翻兩件街咁流啊。一隻人買。仔隻今日好似係要錢喎。哎呀，佢話咯，係。佢話啦，
英文啊？
咩？
哦，我翻去講嘅。
講個先。
你有冇喺電梯度出邊啊？
佢之前間冇搬呢發期。
哦，發期。For many Canadians, a trip to China conjures up images of the exotic. But as a Chinese Canadian, on my first trip back to my village, going to China has a very special meaning. This is Fengdan Village, Toisan County, 2 hours by car southwest of Canton. Everyone here speaks my dialect. It sounds like the Chinatown of my childhood back in Montreal. My second sister, who lives in Edmonton, is here with me.
Lấy mi lên hai cái điều sao mà cô chẳng thấy ít lò hôi lắm phải đi thầu phần đi lắm thế còn đi mà làm mình tôi tìm hết vậy à.
Our family house was built in 1931 with money my father sent from Canada. I was born in this house during my father's last trip back to China in 1948. My mother's niece and her family still live here. They look after the family altar to my grandparents. These last few years, I felt a yearning to return to my village. When my father died in 1982, I felt I had lost my connection to the past, to my roots. Shortly after his death, I got involved in a campaign to redress the decades of suffering the Canadian government inflicted on Chinese immigrants and their families. This involvement gave me a strong impetus to start this journey to find my father's history. I regret, when my father was still alive, we never talked about the past. I'm cherishing every moment here, standing on the same soil that my father and my ancestors have stood on for thousands of years. This is where we all started. I've been a Canadian almost all my life. By coming here, I found a part of me that seems to have been missing for so long, that bond to my ancestry. I have a feeling of sadness as I say goodbye to family and village cousins. Also a feeling of displacement. I know that I don't belong here anymore. My life is in Canada. It's back there that I will find my father's story. It's also the story of thousands of Chinese Canadians who lived through the head tax and exclusion years. My personal journey to find meaning to that past is deeply rooted in the Chinese Canadian experience. 150 years ago, Chinese peasants began leaving this area. Like immigrants from around the world, they sought a better life for themselves and their families in a place called Gold Mountain. My grandfather and my father were among those early pioneers. At the beginning of this century, my grandfather arrived in Vancouver. He walked the same beach, digging for crabs to eat. A young man in his 20s, he came to seek his fortune in Gold Mountain. My father joined him in 1921. They both paid a $500 head tax. And for the next 30 years, they would embark on a bittersweet journey that was uniquely Canadian. My name is William Dere, Ging Wee in Chinese. I consider myself a third-generation Chinese Canadian. For 3 decades, the Chinese Exclusion Act separated my family. The Canadian government refused my father and grandfather the right to bring their wives and children here. I want to come to terms with the effects of that separation on myself and my family. I want to uncover those lost years. How did my father feel being away from his wife and children for so long? My family gets together often in my brother's house in Montreal. Family life is much easier now. But during the period of exclusion, my mother was left in the village in China to look after the family home and to raise the children. She relied on whatever money father could send back. Her situation was typical of the Gold Mountain widows. Like myself, my sisters and my brother were born in China during my father's few visits home.
咁咪見到你一個個要爸爸屋企，我冇爸爸屋企都唔知叫我咯，咁咪見住阿媽咪咯，見住媽咪屋企啊咪阿媽咪另外咪將嗌咯。
咪佢有冇講你話阿爸爸近奶叫喺度啊？
我爸爸近奶咪到洗魚啊，向老闆洗魚啊，我見到眼翻嚟叫我啊我咯。
咪你冇諗叫我點解阿爸爸望你個近奶啊？
佢冇諗我叫時冇諗我唔使嚟諗我，因為叫時中國咧，可能係出洋波吃佢唔冇乜咧嘛，向咧顧前啲單都嗌個過來啊，佢聽影㗎，個係我聽下嘅。
年吃飯嘅時候咧，跟我話爸爸出邊話有一人飯係拜都幫擺，因為爸爸話我咯。
These are just 2 of some 2,600 Chinese Canadians alive today who paid the infamous Chinese head tax. There were 81,000 in all. Today, they want their money back, calling it a tax refund.
The way today's Chinese Canadians tell it, it was shortly after the last spike was driven in 1885, that the Canadian government imposed a head tax on all Chinese immigrants entering this country. The only country to do so, the only immigrants affected. In 1923, it was abolished, but replaced by the Chinese Immigration Act of 1923. This prohibited all Chinese from entering the country. All this was abolished some years later in 1947.
But why the Chinese?
I mean, the explanation was in fact racist, saying that the Chinese are heathens, they're dirty, we do not want to be contaminated by Asians in Canada. That's the pure logic to these laws.
To be here ourselves. We do not want others.
One could dread the pouring in of a horde of celestials from the practically illimitable fountain of 400 million in China.
Indeed, the more I know of the Chinese character, the more I am inclined to the opinion that we are justified in excluding them from this country.
Oh, great. There are more than 81,000 names in these registration books of Chinese immigration. Almost all of them are male. One size fits all. This is where I discovered that my grandfather arrived in 1909. As for my father's entry, serial number 93744. So I guess if I go through, looking at the serial numbers, it's probably towards the back. But let me see now. 937, 933. Okay, yeah, it should be here. 93744. Okay, this is it. It's right here.
Oh, good.
Yeah, the CI-36. He paid a $500 head tax here. Male, 14, he was 14 when he came. Found then. Schoolboy, that was his listed occupation. I didn't know it was this tall, 5'7.5".
So it gives more details.
Yeah, well, it gives, you know, scars on his forefinger. It's quite interesting. They must have checked him over. Now, he was registered on June 9th, but he landed on May 16th. So that means he must have spent about two weeks in the detention center.
Oh, that's quite a while.
Yeah.
So that's when they were investigating him, finding out where all his scars were.
That's it. I guess they checked through his whole body for scars. My father's early days in Canada remain a mystery. My family cannot give me many details about his life during the exclusion years. There's a huge gap in our family history during that time. I decided to go back to Chinatown to find some of the old-timers who may have known my father, hoping they might be able to give me a glimpse of what life was like back then. James Wing is one of the few surviving head taxpayers in Montreal.
That's right.
And can you tell me, when did you first meet my father and my grandfather?
Well, I met your father and grandfather from the very day I arrived at the city. Because my father and your grandfather are belonging into the same Christian association, Chinese YMCI.
Where was that at that time?
That's the Chinese YMCI is over up there, in the middle of this block, just opposite Giver Rose building.
Right.
所以人就話其實個生活冇家庭咧，佢哋冇乜地方去，所以佢哋談判得出嚟㗎，係相見傾談，我哋喺尋民主，政府度咧我哋訂咗好中國嘅報紙啊。
I met James through our mutual involvement in the Redress campaign for the Head Tax and Exclusion Act. He was among the last to arrive in Canada in 1923. He was only 10. Today, his memories of my father and grandfather are sketchy, but James has his own story to tell.
一民入港後，打起個伏包，誰知歡喜反為仇，歸失受困更逐流，無能教，殘酷氣難烤，缺食不堪嚴濟處，英雄到此也垂頭。
When I got to Vancouver, I was sent straight to a building, about 4-story high, quite sized building, and I was put in one flat and a big room. And I noticed in that room there were about 20 or 30 teenager Chinese, all boys, you know, those days no girls. And there are a lot of bunker beds around there, but some beds have a mattress, some have no mattress, the spring, you know. So it happened that my friend had a cotton comforter, and I had a woolen blanket. So we both shared a bed, and we did, otherwise it would be very, very hard for us, because in Vancouver in August, the night was cold, you know, but this way we can stand it within suffer. And I was kept there 2 weeks. We call it like a concentration camp feeling, you know. There's no way to avoid it, so we endured. He had to pay that $100 before they released me, one thing. And I later learned that my father had to pay another $50 to the official there. You know, I later learned, I said, those people did not pay the money to the official. They could be kept there for a month or 3 weeks. But if those people gave them $100, they keep him there just for 1 week. And my father paid him $50, so I was kept for 2 weeks.
My father was locked up in this place for 3 weeks. All Chinese entering Canada in those days had a similar experience.
My father was a stranger, almost a total stranger to me. And then he's not used to kids, and I didn't know how to call him that. All my life, I never called him, say, father or papa. I never. Even when I was growing up, and I maybe make him very disappointed, but I love him. And he, maybe inside him, but he never said it to me. I don't know, it's a psychological, the word cannot pass my throat. I don't know why. Maybe because I wasn't used to do it when I was a baby. I've never seen him before.
Like a child lost, wandering about, touching, feeling, tattered grounds, touching, seeing, wooden boards, etched in ink, etched in weather, etched in fading memories, etched, faded, forgotten. I walk on earth above the bones of a multitude of Golden Mountain men, searching for scraps of memory. Like a child unloved, his face pressed hard against the wet window, peering in. For a desperate moment, I touch my past.
Left my home and my parents at the age of 21. In a family of 8 children, I was the youngest son. Little choice was left to me but to go to a foreign land. Oh, mourn the passing of this wandering Chinaman. I arrived in this country in 1905, a 16-hour day just to try and stay alive. When I saved enough and thought I was doing fine, then came a terrible crash back in 1929.
When I was little, I remember my father taking me to the Hum Family Association on Sundays. My father later co-founded the Jolin Gongsao in Montreal, which united 3 other family clans. The family association was distinctly North American. It was like a substitute family where the men, the lower kill, the old overseas Chinese, would meet and talk. I can imagine my father depositing his money every week at the credit union, sitting down to read the Chinese papers, or just chatting with friends. 佢講我咪爸爸係咪？係咯。